We're up to 40 so far. So folks, we're just waiting until everybody gets connected here and we'll get things underway. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dave Chisholm, and I'll be covering for Mick tonight, who is a little bit under the weather.
Being from down under, would he say over the weather?
Yeah, he's probably over the weather. There we go. Okay, I think our numbers have stabilized, Chris. So if we can just move to the next slide. Okay, just a couple of notes here. We are recording this webinar for posterity, and it will be available at ottawa.rasc.ca. Please use the Q&A box to ask questions. We don't check the chat box for questions, so please do that. Raise your hand is disabled. Okay, here's tonight's program. I'm doing the part of Mick. Stephen Nourse will be our president, is guiding us through our annual general meeting. I'll be doing the Ottawa skies for December. And then Jim Thompson is doing the beach bomb astronomer. We have a break with some AstroTrivia. Got Bob Olson processing images without stars. Then Jim Thompson is up again if time allows for it. We'll do Newton's rings. We've got observation reports, and we've got our monthly observation challenges and any upcoming announcements. So welcome, folks, and I'm going to turn it over to our president for the annual general meeting.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I will certainly try and hustle through this, as I'm quite sure most people would rather be at the presentations. First thing we have to do is establish that we actually have a quorum. So there will be a quick poll coming up. Chris, if you could put that up. We need to find out those of you who are currently members of the RASC Ottawa Centre. So,
and Stephen, it's Chris. All I need to establish here is that we have more than 25 people. We're already well over that number. I'm not counting the no's, so I can end the poll and declare we have quorum.
Excellent.
Okay. Good stuff. So as a co-host, I can't contribute, Chris, just so you're aware.
No, the panelists can vote, but the two co-hosts cannot vote.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, so we're good.
So, okay, next thing is the adoption of the agenda. The full agenda is shown here. So, once again, we are moving with the Zoom poll on this one. But first, we need a motion to approve the agenda. Do we have anyone?
Oscar is done one, yes.
I'll second it, Dave.
Dave is going to second it. So if we could move to a vote on that, Chris.
It's coming. There we are. People are being very speedy. It's wonderful to see the results come in very quickly. I don't know our total numbers, but it is
50. We have 55. So yeah, we definitely have.
We already have 45 people voting unanimously to approve.
All right, excellent. So now we need to adopt the minutes of the 2021 annual general meeting. These were sent out previously with the AGM notice. So hopefully everybody has read them, because we're not going to take the time to go through it here. So I am looking for someone to put forward a motion to adopt the meetings. And we have Gordon Quinn, I would say, is providing that. And do we have a seconder?
Gordon Webster.
Okay.
Actually, Gordon Quinn, I don't believe.
Actually, I don't believe he did. I think
he's
he
asked a
popped up,
question
but
which
I was a little hasty there.
So we're looking for someone to move the motion.
Yes, we are.
I'll move, Dave.
Okay, and do we have a seconder? A second is Rob Dick.
Okay.
Okay, and give a quick vote.
Okay, Chris, we have a majority.
Again, we have unanimous.
Yeah.
There's a few still coming in, but we're more than sufficiently advanced here. We can end that poll and declare it unanimous. Thank you.
Okay. And moving forward, we'll move into the president's report. Okay, so for this, you're going to have to put up with me as a little talking head in the corner, as that seems to be the way that Zoom works for these. So, seems like only yesterday, actually, that I was assuming the center presidency, and now here I am 2 years later, writing my final president's report. It's been a busy 2 years, despite and sometimes because of COVID-19. I sincerely hope that I will be the only Ottawa president to never actually preside at an in-person council or monthly meeting. It's not that either have overtly suffered as a result of going virtual. It's just a different dynamic, and one that I prefer in person when possible. That being said, there's been a significant positive feedback on aspects of the virtual monthly meetings, enough for council to make the decision to definitely hold them in a hybrid virtual in-person format when we're able to return to in-person. Speaking of which, there are indications that we will be able to return to the Canadian Aviation and Space Museum sometime in the new year. First and foremost, I have to thank all of the fabulous people whose volunteer efforts not only keep our wonderful center functioning, but make a president's job even possible. Obviously, the rest of council and the various appointed positions come to mind first. But there are also a host of others who help out in so many ways, from assisting in outreach and star parties, mowing grass, fixing stuff, or just providing sage advice when needed. To each and every one of you, thanks. I could not have been successful without you. Speaking of council, I would like to single out and give thanks to a truly dedicated volunteer who is stepping down after an astonishing 15 years on council. Carmen Rush is leaving council and will be sorely missed. The only thing that softens this a little bit is that she has assured us that being off council will give her time to bring back her astronomical history talks that are so popular. And that segues into talks at our monthly meetings. Wow, is it just me, or is everyone else impressed with the quality and variety of the talks that Mick Wilson is able to assemble every month? Each month seems to have a mix of informative talks, solid how-to tech advice, and of course, those stunning member photographs. However, don't let the caliber of what you see put you off from coming forward and contributing. I personally have found some of the most enjoyable talks and interesting images have come from younger and/or first-time presenters. It's a wonderful, non-judgmental place to jump in and hone your skills. Don't worry about making it look perfect. Either Mick or Chris Tarrant, our secretary extraordinaire and techno wizard behind the scenes at the monthly meetings, will make sure that's taken care of. Perhaps the only concern I have with our monthly meetings is that a newcomer to them may find themselves wondering, what the heck is a quokka and what does it have to do with astronomy? Our center finances are ably overseen by our treasurer, Richard Taylor. Without usurping his report, which will come next, suffice to say that we are fortunate to continue to be in good financial shape. This has enabled us to continue improving how we can serve our members without increasing the Ottawa Centre portion of membership fees. In fact, Council is already working on some initiatives to enhance our existing programs. You'll be hearing more about those in the new year. Speaking of member fees, you undoubtedly have noticed a significant increase in the RASC national portion of them. The manner in which this was rolled out and communicated, along with some other aspects of the center national relationship, is concerning. Concerning not only to Ottawa Council, but a number of other centers as well. A strongly worded joint letter was sent to the RASC Board of Directors, and a dialogue has started with them as a result. There is a need to redefine our relationship to reflect the current needs and expectations of members. This is normal, as a society such as ours has to evolve and adapt as things change. After all, we are over 150 years old. Another aspect of our center with a long history, of course, is Astronauts. Although changing in format many times over the years as technology has progressed, it continues to inform and entertain our members. Our editor, Gordon Webster, is so successful in obtaining, some would say coercing, content that it's a good thing it's emailed now. It would be a massive undertaking, not to mention cost, to print and send it out via snail mail. Sadly, once again, our annual dinner meeting had to be canceled for 2022, making it the third year in a row we've not had one. For a while, there was real hope it will be held this year, but then the September wave finally did it in. There is hope for next year, though. As well, plans are afoot for some sort of outdoor event in 2023 when the weather once again warms up. We did happily see the return of public star parties in 2022. Thanks to the effort of Andrea Garon and her team, the popular Carp Diefenbunker parties were held once again. Scheduling and weather worked to hold 4 of them this year. One of the parties had an estimated 500 plus participants, which has to be some sort of record for that location. Well done, Andrea. In addition, the monthly members-only star parties at Fred Lossing Observatories, or FLO, continue to attract a loyal following. 2022 marks another banner year for FLO. Our observatory director, Rick Scholes, and a host of volunteers have had another great year of upgrades and installations, not to mention staying ahead of the normal maintenance and upkeep. The Ralph Meyer telescope is now fully commissioned and members are being trained on its use. Paul Cloninger has the Hall commissioned telescope in final testing and calibration, and the training guide for it is almost finished. The Mike Wirth telescope continues to provide great views and images. The New Haven mosquito system is really appreciated during bug season. Between the center telescopes and the viewing facilities, there's something for everyone at FLO. I would be remiss in this report if I did not mention the passing of Frank Barrow. Frank was a member for over 20 years and will be missed. On a happier note, we recently learned that our longtime center secretary, Chris Tarrant, now has an asteroid named after him. The International Astronomy Union has named asteroid 10486 as Tarrant. This is well-deserved, as Chris is so involved in all things astronomy. His contributions include outreach, FLO, monthly meetings, unofficial center historian, center secretary, and so much more. Congratulations, Chris. The Ottawa Centre continues to take an active role in ensuring the protection of the former Dominion Observatory here in Ottawa. It is under threat from the new Ottawa General Hospital campus being constructed adjacent to it. Thanks to a dedicated group of volunteers, the Historic Sites and Monuments Board is considering additional protection at their meeting this December. We are also working with Heritage Ottawa, along with various federal and local politicians, to further minimize any impact and preserve the potential for future use of the historic observatory. In leaving, I challenge all of you to reach out to friends, neighbors, strangers, and share your enthusiasm for the night sky by encouraging them to look up. Clear skies. So, and now we'll move along to the Treasurer's report. Richard?
Okay, I have some slides to show.
Richard, I assume you're using the slides that I have, or do you need to
Yes.
share your screen?
Okay, that's this one here then. Okay, that's great. So these are some shortened versions of the financial statements for the fiscal year from October the 1st, 2021 to September 30th, 2022. Next slide, please. However, before we move on to that, the previous year's finances were audited by Paul Sadler, and his report says that the financial statements from the previous year did show the a correct financial position according to generally accepted principles. So this year's books will be audited and the report will come in the next year. Next slide. So here's our statement of income and compared with the previous year. As you see, the membership revenue was a little bit greater. The income from sales and events was quite a bit smaller because last year we had the 50th anniversary of FLO with sales of things like the sweatshirts and so on. This year it was just the calendar sales. Donations were very much higher this year. We had one extremely generous donation from a member. And the other income was also quite a lot greater because of a rebate from one of our insurance companies. They did a demutualization and we received $3,500 from the insurance company. So fairly unusually large amount of income this year. Next slide. As for expenses, our operating expenses were very similar to last year. Again, as I say, we didn't have a lot of goods sold, just the calendars, so that was lower. And so we have a fairly large net surplus this year. And depreciation is the spreading out of capital expenditures over generally 10 years for telescope equipment or 3 years for office equipment. Next slide. So as a result of this, our balance sheet shows quite a bit bigger total amount now, 98,000 versus 90,000 for the previous year. And this represents the considerable increase in value of our equipment at FLO. We now have 3 telescopes and enclosures there, an upgraded electrical system, the Haven mosquito repellent, and it's a lot better condition than it was in previous years. So I really hope members will take advantage of this great benefit we have. Next one. For budgeting purposes, there were 2 special projects. One is a hangover from the previous year. We did receive a donation specifically to subsidize memberships for members who are having financial difficulties due to COVID. We only received 1 request for such a subsidy, so there's still a considerable balance. So I just point out to members that if there is anyone who has experienced some financial difficulties due to COVID, please do ask for a subsidy. We're quite happy to help you with your membership costs. The other special project was the FLO upgrades. Some of the donations were specifically designated for that work, but the work did come out to be an additional $7,700, which has been paid from our reserves from previously. We did cash one of our GICs in order to make sure we had the funding for that, but with the money that came in, we managed to repurchase a GIC anyway. So we haven't changed the cash balance very much at all. Next slide. So on the whole, we remain quite financially viable. We are keeping our operating costs well within our capabilities to raise revenue from memberships and donations. And we have a good cash balance in the bank. So we're looking for other ideas for projects in the future to help members in other ways and to improve the services we offer. So if you have any ideas about projects that we might do to help our members, please do contact any members of council and make a proposal. We have money available and we're quite happy to do things that will promote astronomy in Ottawa. And if there's any other questions, I do have more detailed financial reports available. If anybody really wants to go through the numbers in detail, just send me an email to treasurer@rasc.ottawa.ca. Any questions right now?
I believe it is treasurer@ottawa.rasc.ca. Is that correct?
Sorry,
Yes.
thank you.
And Richard, there are no questions in the Q&A or the chat.
Okay, with that, then we need a motion.
Sorry, I went too fast.
We need a motion to approve the statements.
That's Oscar has made the motion.
I'll second. Dave.
Okay. Then I will launch the poll. Sorry, before I do that, there are 2 questions that have just popped in. The first, which actually has been answered, is were the financial statements audited?
The financial statements will be audited in this next year. The ones that were audited was the ones from the previous year. There's always this 1-year delay in getting the audit done.
And the second question, which I can take, is what's the membership level for RASC Ottawa? From memory, we're at 430 members. COVID's actually been very beneficial to us. Our membership is up, and for the last year or more, we've been in excess of 400 members. So, having answered those, we'll launch the poll to approve the financial statements. And you'll be pleased to know, Richard, that 45 people out of 45 people so far have voted to approve. No dissent, so it's unanimous.
Thank you very much.
48 people now. Okay.
The next motion is for the approval of the auditor for the next year, which will be the audit of this year's books. And once again, we will be asking Paul Sadler to do that. He's also agreed to do it for another year.
Okay, we're looking for someone to make the motion.
Can I make the motion?
Okay. It would be appropriate, Richard, that you've done it, yes, and then Brian can second it. Brian McCullough. And I will bring up the poll. And once again, we have in excess of 40 people voting, and it is unanimous. So I'll close the poll.
Thank you again.
And with that, we can move to the next segment, which is the election of councillors. So I'll turn it back to Stephen.
Okay. The slate for this year was put together by the nominating committee that was headed up by Mike Mogadan, the current past president. That's one of his duties. And he was assisted by the committee consisting of Tim Cole and Gordon Webster. So they put together the following slate for the council. You will notice that it just neatly fills everybody. So, Chris, you can put up the acclaimed. There will be no voting for anyone in council this year. The next group of people.
Sorry, just you may want to stay here for a second, Stephen, and point out some significant changes in council this year.
Well, yes, I'm gone. That's the biggest one. I am no longer president. I will be continuing on council as past president. Our new incoming president is Dave Chisholm, who everybody is very familiar with, and I'm sure is going to do a fabulous job. Vice president sees the return of Oscar Terry as our new vice president. Oscar is no stranger to council. He has held a number of positions there, but took some time off for family reasons, and it's delightful to see him back. Chris Terran remains as our secretary, as Richard Taylor also remains as our treasurer. A little bit of a shakeup in the councillor world, as I mentioned earlier. Carmen Rush has left council after 15 years, and we welcome a newcomer, Katie Francis. Looking forward to working with Katie and getting to know her. Existing or incumbent councillors, Jerry Schwan and Jim Sophia are returning. Mick Wilson stays on as meeting chair. And our national council reps are Jonathan Falbo and Mick Wilson. As Chris pointed out, we are consistently well above 400 members now. So we have the option to have a third national council rep. So if someone is interested in taking on that role, please contact anyone on council, and we're happy to give you some more information on that. These are the proposed appointed positions. They are only proposed under the structure we operate under. They would be officially appointed at the first meeting of the new council, which is scheduled for sometime in January. So we'd have Estella Rother continuing as our librarian. We really hope to be getting back to a physical library access in 2023, although some volumes are available. So do contact Estelle if there is something of particular interest, as we are trying to get some volumes out to people that would like them. Mick Wilson is staying on as our the webmaster. Gordon Webster, Astronaut's editor. Rick Scholes as our FLO director. A little bit of movement on light pollution. Andrea Jerome has decided to take on this role for us, or offered to take on this role for us, which we would really be looking forward to. That one's been a little dormant, and it would be nice to see it energized. Another new face stepping up for our public outreach coordinator, Acer Elgindi. He's been with us only a little while. He's been with the RSC a bit more, mainly in the Kingston Center, actually, but he's now in Ottawa, and looking forward to working with him on outreach. Public star parties, which Andrea was handling before. Katie Francis, our new council member, has stepped up and expressed an interest in that. So again, looking forward to working with Katie on that. With regard to the hospitality, that is still open. It's been vacant for a while since Art and Ann Fraser stepped away from it. However, the need hasn't been that great because of the lack of in-person meetings. We're hoping we really do need this person soon. Tedley Bean Loan Library, that position is open right now. If you have an interest in, it's more coordinating the scopes, just making sure that they're accounted for and make it back. We'd certainly like to have someone dealing with that. We do have a number of scopes, and we do want to get them out to people. Art Fraser continues in his role as in charge of the membership. So again, these would be officially appointed at the January meeting. Ottawa Centre has a number of awards that are given out every year in recognition of the effort and the volunteer aspect that so many of the people contribute. It's a shame we don't have more awards. I think there's a lot more deserving people out there, and sometimes it's very difficult to bring it down to just what we give out. We hope that they recognize the core values from the RASC and the Ottawa Centre. And that's the sharing of the knowledge and experience, the collaboration and fellowship, enrichment of the community we're in through diversity, and discovery through the scientific method. This year we have a number of awards. The first one being the Paul Commission Observer of the Year Award. This award is awarded annually to the member who has contributed most to the advancement of astronomy. Hang on, there's something hidden here, Chris. Actually,
I don't see an issue.
well, the problem is my screen where I can't read it because it's hiding under all the little people.
Stephen, you can move those by clicking on the top.
Which is what I've just done. In the group, the purpose of the award is to stimulate a keener interest in observational astronomy among the members of the group. In keeping with this purpose, the selection is based primarily on actual observations and their value to astronomy and to our group as observers. Of course, construction of a useful piece of apparatus is also a valuable contribution, but the emphasis should be on the use of such an apparatus to obtain results of scientific value. Now, a huge part of the Paul Commission Observer of the Year Award is the observing log, because Paul's favorite statement, if it's not written down, it never happened. So, what's the point of the award? Just like Hubble, James Webb Space Telescope, Spitzer, we do science and we do pretty pictures. Now, I didn't actually select this award. This one is done by this year would have been done by Mick, I believe, correct?
Yeah, the meeting chair. Yeah,
the meeting chair. So, and he uses his good judgment in the promotion of science and public engagement. Okay.
So the winner
is Andrea Guéron. Andrea, we have consistently, meeting after meeting, been amazed at the observations and your photography. So absolutely deserving. Our next award is the Rolf Meyer Award for Planetary Observing. Richard Taylor. Richard, you have been providing us with some absolutely wonderful views of the planets. Ralph would be proud. And the best presentation of the year Tony Peterson with Andrea, an active complex on the summer sun. Just the science, the photography, I don't think there's a person out there that wouldn't agree that this was just a fabulous presentation this year. And the image of the year goes to Oscar for his photograph of the Dirichlet Group and Stefan's Quintet. And I believe you have that. Yes, there we are. The more you look at this image, the more you see. It is just amazing.
We'll turn things
Now
over
I'll
for
turn
a
it
moment.
over to Gordon.
Well, good evening, everyone. Some years this is an easy decision, and some years it's a struggle. And this year was a bit of a struggle. The decision came down to two articles, one well-written and researched, the other well-written and thought through. Both are the type of articles that I would like to encourage more of in Astronauts. I weighed both of these for a few days, and I consulted with my assistant editor, Doug Fleming, but he wasn't much help because he agreed on both of them for much the same reasons I had. So the article that kept tempting me was from the October issue, and that was Mick Wilson's The Very Future of Canadian Astronomy and his appeal for Quokka Borealis to replace Canis Minor. I thought it was very clever, very entertaining, and very funny. There's something Australians aren't normally known for. However, I ultimately decided to go with something a little more based in reality and selected from the June issue, Bob Olson's Cassini. I found it well written, well researched, well illustrated and relevant, and it taught me what normal is. Congratulations, Bob.
We'll turn it back to Stephen for the
All
Center
right.
Awards.
Ottawa Centre gives out a service award for sustained exemplary service to the RASC Ottawa Centre. And here's where I do feel that we could be giving out lots of these, but we do try and keep it special. This year goes to Mick Wilson. Mick's just been popping up absolutely everywhere the last while. He looks after our website. He has done yeoman's service in providing an electronics document system for us. He's been digitizing a lot of our history and putting on it. He's functioning as our national council rep. He's been our meeting chair. He just, and actually, I don't think the guy knows how to say no sometimes, which is probably a problem, but he's just been doing so much that we just felt this year it's a thank you to Mick. Unfortunately, he's not here to be aware of this tonight, but I'm pretty sure he'll find out soon.
And I tried so hard to hide this slide from him.
Yes, exactly. And you didn't have to. There is one more award, and that's the President's Award. It's kind of a fairly recent one. It was brought in so that the president could say a special thank you to someone or provide some recognition in areas that perhaps weren't necessarily covered by the other awards or a standard service award. It's basically given in grateful recognition of your many outstanding contributions to the Ottawa Centre. And I'm electing, as one of the last things I'm doing as president, to award it to Rick Scholes. Rick, the effort that he puts into FLO, the telescopes, the sites, to outreach, to making sure people are trained, and even just caring about others is, or at least what I've seen, is caring about others in the center. And he just never stops. And it's from the heart. And I truly believe he is absolutely worthy of more recognition than what he gets. So, Rick, congratulations. I certainly appreciate what you do, and I'm damn sure there's a lot of other people in this center that do it as well.
Stephen, unfortunately, I'm reviewing the list of people attending the meeting tonight, and it doesn't appear as if Rick is here, but we'll make sure he gets this message.
Darn.
I hope I'm wrong, and I hope he's hiding in the background, but I don't see him there.
Yeah. Could be. Anyway, before we close out the annual general meeting aspect of this, is there any other business that anyone wants to raise? And
I'm monitoring the Q&A box, and there are no questions.
there's nothing on the Q&A box. Then I believe we can wrap this up. I just need a motion to adjourn.
I'll move.
All right.
Gordon Dewis is second. And I will find the poll again. This is normally a fast and easy one.
Right. And we will turn this back over to Dave, who can move us on to something lighter.
And once again, we have full voting and unanimous.
Okay, well, I'd be remiss in not thanking Stephen for all his work as president. I've got big shoes to fill in this upcoming year, so thank you, Stephen, and I look forward to working with you as past president on the upcoming council. Welcome new members. So we have Fred, Ethan, Jane, Paul, Emile, Anne, Clara, and Mark, who have joined us in the last month. We have 61 new members in 2022. So welcome, folks, and a special welcome to our newest members if they're online here today. Members in the news, we have a number here. So Dave Anderson has been awarded the Messier Certificate. Congratulations, Dave. The Hydrogen Alpha Solar Observation Program was presented to Andrea Gironis. Honorable mention. This is a Dark Sky Nebula by Oscar, and this is in Sky News. So congratulations, Oscar. And from the International Astronomy Union, a well-deserved recognition there. So Chris Terran now has an asteroid named after him. So we're looking forward to, maybe that could be one of our challenges, to try to find that asteroid in upcoming meetings. What are the benefits of membership? First of all, the cost of memberships are here. So it's $103 for a regular. Family membership, it's sort of split. It's a little bit cheaper than buying a bunch of individual memberships. And then we have a youth membership. So what do you get for these memberships? First of all, locally, we have the Ted Bean Loan Library. And we have the Fred Lossing Observatory out near Almont. Excellent resource. It's a private area for members only. Once we get back into the museum, we'll have access to the Stan Mott Library. Estelle does an excellent job of looking after that. And as was mentioned, we do have some of the volumes pulled from that library. And if you're interested in, maybe you're starting up in astronomy and you want to know what might be a good book, email us and we will try to pull a book out there for you. And then nationally, you get the Sky News every second month, the Journal every second month, the Observer's Handbook you get late November, early December. And we have our really well done Astronauts that comes out monthly, normally immediately after our monthly meetings. So Gordon Webster is in charge of that. And one of the best part of the memberships is just getting to know the people in the RASC and all the people involved here. And we got pictures of some of them. And yeah, I think that's one of the best benefits. So let's move then into the Ottawa skies for December. So here we are, we're on the 2nd of December. We're moving towards a full moon on the 8th of December. By our local Indigenous communities, it was known as the cold moon. Other names for this moon are the long night's moon and the moon before Yule. We got a new moon on the 23rd. So we have the Geminids meteor shower. This is one of the major meteor showers of the year, about 120 per hour. It was it's a result of asteroid 3200 Thalatheon. I don't know if I pronounced that right. It radiates from Gemini, the constellation Gemini. It's a waning gibbous moon, which means it's going to be blocking out some of the dimmer ones. But because there's so many, 120 per hour, they're very colorful as well. Best time probably after midnight to see the Geminids. We have the Ursids meteor shower, December 21st and 22nd. This one is occurring just around the new moon, almost a new moon. So the moon won't be in the way, but you got to sit around for a while. You only got about 5 to 10 per hour. And it was left behind by Comet Tuttle, and it originates from Ursa Minor. And because these occur before our next meeting, we have the Quadratids meteor shower, January 2nd and 3rd. Radiates sort of from the Boots area of the sky, about 40 per hour, but it's nearly a full moon, so probably not the best thing to view. As you can see, the days are getting shorter and shorter, but as of December 21st, they start to get a little more sunlight again. Mercury is at its greatest eastern elongation. That means it's furthest away from the sun. And in this case, it's just after sunset on December the 21st. So that's probably the best time to try to spot Mercury. Venus is visible in the early evening now. Mars is visible in the evening, and it's at opposition closest to the Earth on December the 8th. So that's this upcoming Thursday. Jupiter is visible in the evening sky. I was out last night. It was right above the moon. Saturn's visible in the evening sky as well. Uranus is visible in the evening through the night. Neptune is visible in the evening. And I know this is a bit of an eye chart, but these are the planets' visibility for 2023. This will be an Astronauts, so it gives you sort of an idea of when is the best time to look at the various planets. We're not going to have Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn together at all next. Well, we're going to have them in January and half of February, but after that, all three of those are not going to be together for the rest of the year. So get out in the cold of January and appreciate those three together. And actually, we've got Venus there too. And here's our cartoon of the month. For those of you this is referring to the light shift, red and blue. So I thought it was a neat cartoon. Okay, thank you. Okay, so we're going to have a report from a beach bum, which happens to be Jim Thompson this month. So there we go. There you go, Jim. You're on.
All right, thanks, Dave. I'm just going to switch over to sharing my screen. There, you should be able to see my slide deck there now.
It looks good.
All right. Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to my report from a beach bum astronomer. This was supposed to be presented last month, but we ran out of time with all the awesome observer reports, so we'll try to get through it tonight. This presentation is meant to catch you up on what I was doing all this past summer. I've been busy, perhaps a little too busy, too much so to fit into a regular observing report slot, hence the preparation of this separate summary presentation. Just going to minimize that. Okay. So an outline of what I intend to go through tonight is I'll start with where I was located during the summer, and then talk about what equipment I used, and then give you a summary of some of my many observations. These include views plenty wide, feeling a little gassy, surviving a bug apocalypse, beholding the lowest of the low, falling in love, or a strong like, and having my socks blown off. So let's start with the first one on the list, where I was at. My family's cottage is on the Ottawa River near the village of Sheemborough, Quebec, about 180 kilometers northwest of our house in Ottawa. The section of the river we are on is quite wide, so it is more like being on a large lake. It is a really lovely spot and quite peaceful when the weekend boaters are not around. The north, south, and west horizons are very low, which makes for some fabulous sunsets. The night sky is also pretty good, although not as dark as you might think. This image is the view looking south through a 4mm fisheye lens. The light pollution you can see is from the town and Canadian Forces Base Petawawa. Being so close to a moderate-sized town means that my skies are not that dark. Around Bortle 6 when looking south, and Bortle 4 when looking north. Still, it is a lot darker than my backyard in Ottawa. Now let's have a look at my rig. My setup is geared towards electronically assisted astronomy. I used a Meade LX65 side-by-side Alt-Az mount with 2 of 3 possible scopes at one time, a William Optics 80mm refractor, an ASCAR 50mm refractor, or a TPO ultra-wide 40mm refractor. For cameras, I used a monochrome Malincam DS432M Tech and a color ZWO ASI 533MC Pro. Of course, I had an assortment of filters with me, and all this was driven using a laptop. A few other things to note about my setup. My tripod is securely anchored to the sand because we can get very high wind gusts during thunderstorms. My setup is powered by a 50-foot extension cord running to a nearby bunkhouse, and I have made a collapsible shield to protect my laptop from the sun during the day and the dew at night. I also use occasionally a point and shoot setup. A Canon M3 mirrorless camera with Canon 18-150 zoom lens. I also have a Leica 4mm fisheye lens that I use sometimes. All this sits on a standard Manfrotto tripod. One thing that you may have noticed about my setups is that they are portable. This is important because the water levels on the river can change quickly and dramatically. This image was taken on the May long weekend. The red X marks roughly where my telescope was set up in July. So you can see why I don't have a permanent setup. Well, that's it for where I was and what I was using. Now for some observations. Almost all of my observing at the cottage took place during the first 3 weeks of July, while I was on vacation. First up is views plenty wide. Some of you may recall a presentation I gave a while back on mini refractors. It so happens that the summer Milky Way has lots of fascinating things suitable to observe using a mini refractor. The first example is the area around M8, the Lagoon Nebula. This part of the Milky Way is rich in star-forming regions, dust clouds, and star clusters. These two images, by the way, were captured simultaneously using two different camera plus scope setups. One of the things I like about the LX65 side-by-side mount. The images are live stacks of 5 minutes total duration, as noted at the top of each image. The next example is the region around M24, the Sagittarius star cloud. This part of the sky is also rich in emission nebulae, star clusters, and dark nebulae, not to mention the view of the millions of stars deeper in towards the center of our galaxy. The third example is an image of a vast nebulous region in Cygnus. I have no idea what its designation is. In fact, I was sort of lost at the time looking for the Tulip Nebula. All I know is it is near open cluster NGC 6871. The final example is of emission nebula IC 1396. Most people think only of the elephant's trunk feature. But this nebula is rich in other interesting features as well, especially if you like dark nebula, like I do. The next observation to discuss has to do with my experimenting with narrowband imaging. This involves gathering image data from one gas emission at a time using special filters. I decided to explore this new to me area because Optolong sent me a free set of 3 nanometer wide filters to try out. This is the image I collected of the Lagoon Nebula using the hydrogen alpha filter. It is a stack of 12 50-second frames using my DS432M camera. The next image was taken using an oxygen 3 filter. Notice the emission seems to be concentrated only in the center of the nebula compared to the hydrogen alpha. The final filter used was sulfur 2. It produced a view of the nebula that was different again, sort of a ghostly outline. With data in 3 emission bands collected, I combined them together into a color image using the Hubble palette. This uses the hydrogen alpha image for the green channel, the oxygen 3 for the blue channel, and the sulfur 2 for the red channel. For my first attempt at narrowband imaging, I think it turned out not too bad. My next observation has to do with surviving the bug apocalypse. As you may imagine, there are lots of bugs at our cottage. Mosquitoes, black flies, horse flies, deer flies, you name them, we've got them. Luckily, there is a gizmo called a thermocell that works great for keeping them at bay while I'm doing my observing. However, on July 22nd, I encountered something quite different from the usual flying pests. This is what I saw when I was heading outside to set up for my night of observing. Every little source of light had thousands of tiny bugs swarming around them. They were small enough to fly through our window screens, so I had to turn off every light source in the cottage I could find to keep them out. I have never seen anything like it before. Fortunately, they did not seem to like the beach, and were not a problem once I was at my telescope. My next observation involves beholding the lowest of the low, by which I mean objects very low in the sky. I captured this image with my Canon M3 to illustrate my view looking south on July 22nd. Here is the outline of the teapot asterism in Sagittarius and some bright Messier objects to help orient you. From my backyard in Ottawa, I can't see much below M8. So my time at the cottage is an opportunity to explore parts of the southern sky I don't normally get to see. One of the objects I explored was NGC 6520, the Dead Man's Chest cluster. It was sitting at about 16 degrees elevation at the time. I found it very interesting to observe, especially with the striking dark nebula right beside it. Heading lower, another object I observed was NGC 6357, the Lobster Nebula, or sometimes called the Warren Peace Nebula. This is a star-forming region that is quite distorted and complex looking. And there are some supermassive stars apparently being born in this nebula. Even lower still is one of my favorite summer challenge objects, NGC 6334, the Cat's Paw Nebula. It was sitting at about 8 degrees elevation when this image was captured. I was quite happy with this and my monochrome image, considering the light pollution and thin cloud I was looking through to capture it. Finally, the lowest of the low for that night was an object I've never observed before, IC 4628, the Prawn Nebula. It was sitting at only 3 degrees elevation. I am amazed I was able to pick this object out of the muck, all thanks to the light pollution filters I was using. Changing topics. This was a summer of love for me. Love, that is, of a new piece of astronomy equipment. For a while now, I have been searching for a more capable monochrome camera for solar imaging. In particular, I've been looking for a camera that can deliver a fast frame rate, high sensitivity, large sensor size, and small pixels. My objective is to capture high-resolution images of the entire solar disk using a 4-inch refractor. The first camera I purchased for this task is based on the IMX290 CMOS sensor. It is super fast and has small pixels, but the sensor is only 1/3 of an inch across, so too small to capture the whole sun in one field of view. The second camera I tried is based on the IMX183 sensor. It has even smaller pixels, and the sensor is plenty big enough to capture the entire solar disk. However, when imaging with narrowband filters like Solar H-alpha, it displays an annoying grid artifact over the entire sensor. Another sensor that has become popular for solar imaging is the IMX432. It is very sensitive, with low noise and a fast frame rate. The sensor size is big as well, but the pixels are huge, making it, in fact, a very low-resolution sensor. There are other cameras coming onto the market for solar imaging, but they all have large pixels, and most are color cameras, not monochrome. After digging around on the Sony sensor website, I found a sensor that might fit my requirements, the IMX226. It is a larger sensor and has tiny pixels, much smaller pixels than any of the other cameras I've tried. Now, if only I could find a camera made using this sensor. I discovered that the sensor is not commonly used, but I was able to find a camera in stock from a German industrial machine vision manufacturer called Imaging Source. The camera is adorable. a little cube, roughly 1 inch on each side. Here are a couple of sample solar images captured using the camera. First, in calcium K. This is one of the most detailed calcium K images I have ever captured, taken from my backyard in downtown Ottawa. When I zoom in, you can really appreciate the resolution the camera is delivering. Note that I have added color here after the fact. The original image is in black and white. Next, an image in hydrogen alpha. Here again, I was able to capture more detail than I have been able to with my other cameras. If you are interested, I performed a rigorous comparison test between this new camera and my existing cameras, the summary report for which is available upon request. You should expect to see more solar images from me using this camera in the future. And now for my final observation. The evening of July 22nd was a great night for me. It was the last observing night before the end of my summer vacation. I survived the bugpocalypse. I observed objects lower in the southern sky than ever before. I even witnessed a big, bright draconid that streaked across 40 degrees of sky, slow moving with a persistent sparkling trail. As if that was not enough, Mother Nature decided to grace me with an aurora. It was hard to see with the naked eye, but my M3 mirrorless camera picked it up just fine. A lovely display of greens, reds, and pinks that lasted for just over an hour. My goodness. One could not ask for a better way of closing out one's summer holidays. But wait, there's more. I was at my cottage again on Labor Day weekend. That Sunday, there was another aurora. This one much bigger and brighter than the one in July. Easily viewable naked eye. This is a time-lapse video taken over the course of an hour, showing how the show evolved. It took up about 100 degrees of azimuth in a north-northwesterly direction and grew to about 60 degrees of altitude at times. The camera, you'll find, is jumping around because I was moving back and forth between the aurora and something else that was going on, as you'll see in a moment. You may also notice concentric rings in the middle of the image, something I will talk more about in my next presentation. This was by far the most spectacular auroral display I have ever seen, especially from this far south. And yet, there's more. About 40 minutes into the auroral show, I noticed a bright vertical streak away from the main show in the due west direction. At first, I thought it was a cloud illuminated by the setting moon. But when I took a picture, it was very clearly something else. It was Steve. For those not familiar with Steve, it's an acronym for Strong Thermal Emission Velocity Enhancement. This is another time lapse of about 20 minutes duration, showing how the phenomenon evolved and then eventually vanished. I was under the impression that this phenomenon was only visible at much higher altitudes, or latitudes rather. But there it was. Wow. What a show. And what a great way to finish off a fabulous summer of astronomy. So that's a wrap. Thanks for watching. If anybody has a quick question, I'd be happy to answer it.
Thank you very much, Jim. That was really good. Any questions? Lots of comments, or lots of good jobs. Okay, well, thank you, Jim. So I guess we'll turn the slides back over to Chris then. Okay, so we're going to move into a 5-minute break. And since I'm the temporary meeting chair tonight, I thought I would ask a question that maybe Mick wouldn't ask. Well, he would know the answer anyways. So when Mick was growing up in the land down under, how did he find due south using the stars? Here in the Northern Hemisphere, we have Polaris, which is the North Star. There is no South Pole nor a South Star. They have to use a little bit of triangulation. So let's see if anybody knows the answers to that, and we'll rejoin in 5 minutes. Okay, folks, so let's see how I'm just going to go through the answers here. Yeah, so Philippe came the closest when it came to the answers here. So let's go to the answer slide then. Okay, so they do not have a star directly south. The Southern Cross is sort of southways. You probably recognize the stars in the Southern Cross. Those are the stars in the flag of Australia and also the flag of New Zealand. So what you have to do is you have to draw a line through the center of the cross all the way down to the horizon. And then there's 2 pointer stars, Alpha and Beta Centauri. Draw a line perpendicular to the line going between those 2 stars. And where that line intersects with the line from the Southern Cross, there's south. Could do a little bit of math there. The other thing interesting to point out, if you're down in Australia, in North America, we're used to looking up in the sky and watching all the planets and the sun and everything else go from left to right. Well, because we're looking south and all that stuff's happening over the equator, well, when you're down in Australia, everything goes from right to left. And it can sort of throw you off a little bit. I was down in Australia in 2018. And it just happened to be there when they were having a lunar eclipse. And I got up, I was in Melbourne, and got up at 4 o'clock in the morning to watch this. And I went, the moon's going the wrong way. And I realized, oh, yes, I'm in the Southern Hemisphere. Anyways, it's interesting. While I was down there, I went to a number of astronomy presentations for beginners, and they all sort of took you through the method for figuring out the South Pole. So anyways, one of the comments in the questions was that Mick never figured this out because he ended up in Ottawa. So anyways, good answer. Okay, let's move on here. So Bob Olson, let me highlight you here. There you go.
And I've got to ask out loud to Bob, am I running the slides, Bob, or are you sharing your screen?
No, you're running them, Chris.
Okay.
Okay. Well, Gordon, by the way, Gordon Webster has informed me that the slides and commentary will be printed in the next issue of Astronauts. This will allow you to easily review everything I'm about to say. Next slide, please. When I first started to image, I made a philosophical decision to do the same thing to every part of the image. This was a desire to keep the image as true as to the original as possible. This was probably a subconscious decision based on my scientific background.
Thus, I had an aversion to things like masks and weird color adjustments. But this is in fact nonsense, as all of my images fall into the category of pretty pictures rather than scientific research. So recently I've started playing a little loose with my imaging philosophy. All of us want tight stars. This is the sign that you're in control of your equipment and processing. Sometimes knowing the cause of a problem can suggest a solution. So let's take a look at some causes of large stars in your image. Next slide, please. This is what a star should look like. This image is a theoretical computer-generated image of a star. You can see the central maximum spot surrounded by faint or diffraction rings. If your optics were perfect and you were imaging in outer space with no air, this is what your images would look like. Next image, please. A graph of this image would look like this. If you look carefully at the first diffraction ring, you can see that this might be brighter than what you're trying to image. Next slide. How would this image be affected by our imaging equipment? Let's use my 12-inch Newtonian reflector as an example. Next image. Theta is the angle from the edges of the star to the central spot in the star that you're imaging. I want to choose a gigantic and nearby star, Betelgeuse. We can find that angle to be 1/20th of an arc second. Theta is proportional to the frequency of the light and inversely proportional to the diameter on the mirror. On my scope, that makes it about 0.396 arc seconds. This is 8 times larger than the diffraction spot of Betelgeuse. It becomes worse when you realize the pixels on my camera are 0.95 arc seconds, which is 20 times larger than Betelgeuse. But we are not done yet. In my area, the seeing is 2 arc seconds at best, and usually closer to 3 arc seconds, which is 40 times bigger than the diffraction spot of Betelgeuse. So a star, which should easily fit in 1 pixel, will in fact cover at least 4 and probably 9 pixels if everything is perfect. What can we learn from this? Well, first, get a bigger telescope, say 10 meters across. Second, get out of the air, maybe go to the top of a mountain. It seems the professional astronomers are aware of this formula. Next slide, please. If you are working to get smaller stars using image processing, make sure your stars aren't big because your scope is not wildly out, is focused properly. This is a photo of the Crab Nebula taken in O3 light. I forgot that I had a filter in the optical path, so the image is wildly out of focus. Next image. This is a magnified view of some of those stars. I use a reflecting telescope, so it has a secondary. The shadow of the secondary shows up if the scope is badly out of focus. Next. This is a crop of one of my Andromeda Galaxy images. It is somewhat soft. The focus might not be quite right, or possibly the seeing was bad. It is very tempting to head to the sharpening button to reduce star sizes. Most of these, like unsharp mask, enhance the edges. When an edge looks fuzzy to the program, it steals some of the gray and puts it into the bright or dark, whichever makes the edge look more distinct. Next image, please. This is what the picture would look like if you used an insane amount of unsharp mask. You can see that not only has it sharpened the stars, but it has also sharpened the noise, and the picture looks terrible. Next. Here's a close-up of that sharpened image. This can produce sharp-edged stars, which do not look real. This also produces rings around the star. So instead of a large star, you have an unattractive star. I don't find this a big improvement. If you Google reducing star sizes in images, you will find all kinds of instructions for various imaging processing programs. I use Photoshop, and I do have a set of instructions for Photoshop. These steps are onerous at best, and the results are mediocre. There are also add-on programs for almost all astronomical processing programs. Many of these work very well. Next image. But today I want to talk about an entirely different way of approaching star reduction, and that is processing the background and the stars separately. This idea has been around for a long time, but it is only recently that the computing power and programming knowledge has been aimed at it to deal with it. The first time I became aware of this technique was the processing of comet pictures, where the comet moves relative to the background stars. You could get a much more pleasing picture if you processed the stars from only one image and combined it with a stack of just comet pictures. In the beginning, this was done manually, which was painstakingly slow. Eventually, some programs were developed that could do it automatically, although not well. With the advent of artificial intelligence, there are now several programs that do this and do it very well. Next image. Here is the unprocessed stack of images that produce the image that you just saw. When the image comes out of the camera and you look at it without stretching it, all that you see are a few bright stars. Even if you stack tons of individual images, all you will see are the stars. To see the fainter stuff in the image, it must be stretched. Next image, please. Every astronomical imaging program has some method of stretching an image so that the dim parts look brighter. Curves is the process used by Photoshop, which is the program I use. The bottom axis of this graph is the brightness of the pixels from dark on the left to white on the right. The left vertical axis is the brightness of the pixels after the curve is applied. If you leave the curve as the faint diagonal line from corner to corner, no change in the image occurs. If you pull the line up, the image gets brighter. If you pull the line down, the image gets darker. You can selectively increase the brightness of just the dim parts, or just the bright parts, or all of the pixels, depending on the shape of the curve. The example shown here is selectively brightening the dim parts more than the bright parts. I have saved this curve under the name AstroCurve. I use it all the time. Next. Here is the image after I have applied this curve. I achieve more control by applying a less severe curve several times until I reach the brightness that I wish. In this case, the curve was applied 3 times. Unfortunately, when you stretch the faint stuff, the stars are also stretched. Some of those faint diffraction rings that we talked about earlier start to show up in the image. They might even be brighter than the object you're trying to image. The trick is how to stretch the faint stuff without making the stars brighter. Notice that the gray histogram part of this graph is moving to the right as we stretch the image. This is exactly what we want. We want the stuff that we're interested in to be in the mid-range of brightness. Next image, please. But as we do this, the stars are also getting brighter and bigger. This is clearly shown when we compare the correctly processed image on the left with the stretched only image on the right. Next slide, please. Here is the original image again. Let's try and keep the stars this size if we can. The obvious solution to do this is to remove the stars from the image before we stretch it. Next slide, please. For many years now, I have been using a gradient exterminator written by Russell Croman. He recently developed a program that he calls Star Exterminator. This program will eliminate the stars in almost any image. It uses artificial intelligence and is now in version 2. It is available as a Photoshop plugin and as an add-on to PixInsight. Since I use Photoshop in my image processing, I bought that version. It's about $80 Canadian for either version. I must give a recommendation here to PixInsight. Most imagers have switched from Photoshop to PixInsight as it is better suited to astronomical images than Photoshop, and probably more powerful. I have stuck with Photoshop because I am too lazy to learn another program. PixInsight is available for about $320. You can no longer buy Photoshop, but must rent it for $25 a month. I'm the owner of an old version. I must be clear that there are many other image processing programs besides Photoshop and PixInsight. Many are cheaper and even free. So if you're just starting off, look around. There are also other programs besides Star Exterminator, which may also be cheaper and may even be better. I'm only describing the programs with which I am familiar. Next image, please. When you read the instructions from Russell Croman, He suggests removing the stars before you do any processing. That is, processing after calibration. If you look at the second last instruction, you will see that you will end up with 3 layers in Photoshop: the stars, a starless layer, and the original image in case you screw up. He then suggests that you process the starless and star layers separately to taste. I think the operative phrase here is to taste. Next image. Against Russell's suggestion, I do a preliminary stretch to an image and quit when the stars are about as bright as I want them in the final image. I must admit that I have not experimented with doing it his way. It is always risky doing something contrary to what the author of the program suggests. So be advised, read the instructions, and proceed accordingly. The faint background is still too faint. Next slide, please. Here is the opening dialog box for Star Exterminator. As you can see, you don't get a lot of options. I have never checked the large tile overlap box, but I have heard that it slows the processing down. When you click the OK button, the program takes over and removes the stars. Depending on your image size and complexity and power of your computer, this can take a bit of time. Several minutes of processing is apparently not uncommon. But compared to the hours it takes to manually remove stars, it is a monstrous improvement. Next slide. When you run the program, you are left with this layer, completely void of stars. The red arrow is showing that we have a Photoshop layer here. No stars. The image is extremely faint. Next slide, please. This is the layer of just stars. You get it by following his instructions. The basic idea is to subtract the starless image, which you just created, from the original image, leaving just the stars. Next image. The bottom layer is the original image, which hopefully you will not need. Next image, please. I am back on the starless layer. I can now stretch it to suit my taste, as you can see from the curves menu. And I can do it without any fear of stretching the stars, as they're gone. Number 26. Next slide, please. I mentioned earlier that I tend to stretch several times rather than one big stretch. That allows me to fine-tune the brightness of my image. In this case, I decided to stretch some of the brighter parts of the nebula and to increase the contrast of some of the mid-range tones. Contrast is increased when the stretch line gets steeper. Now, Chris, could you just back up once and then ahead again? Yeah, you can see the difference, I believe. All right, next image. In this image, I used a small amount of unsharp mask to sharpen some of the fine detail. As you can see in the blown up area, the sharpening also increased the noise. Next image. Now I turn on the stars so they appear in the image. From the curves graph, you can see that I also reduced the brightness a small amount, again, to suit my taste. When I put the stars back into this image, I found that they were a little too bright for me, so I dimmed them a bit by pulling that curve in the graph box down a little bit. Again, this is a personal taste, what you do there. Okay, next, please. When you stack a bunch of images, they are rarely all identical. This makes the edges a bit ragged as the different images overlap differently. So usually I crop the edges of my image. So here's a crop. I'm going to chop off the edge. Next. And this is my final image. That is until I discover some new processing trick and try it all again. Thanks. Have a great day.
Okay, thank you very much, Bob. And I believe we have another presentation by, is he on? There he is. There's Jim. He disappeared there for a second. So yeah, we're going to be running just a little bit later tonight, but I think we'll be fine. We got a lot of observation reports.
Okay, I'll try to move quickly then through my second presentation. I'm going to share it here. You should see a fine image of Isaac Newton there on the screen now. So welcome everyone to my second presentation this evening, Newton and his dang rings. My story begins this past Labor Day weekend. As I shared with you in my first presentation tonight, on the evening of September 4th, I was very lucky to be in the right place at the right time to witness a spectacular aurora. With all the excitement, it wasn't until the next morning that I noticed all of my images had a concentric ring pattern in the middle of the frame. Dang it! Were all of my images ruined by this artifact? It would seem that I was another victim of the dreaded Newton's rings. Although it is small consolation, I am not alone in my ring woes. This is a very common artifact encountered by solar hydrogen alpha imagers, typically showing up as a repeating pattern of light and dark bands. Depending on the particular geometry generating the artifact, the radius of the rings can vary, even being essentially straight lines in some cases. This artifact is most common when the imager is using a Barlow lens with their camera to increase image scale. So, some of you may be wondering, how could something like this happen to such a nice guy? Well, the answer is simple. I forgot to remove the haze filter from my camera when I took the aurora photos. What makes this all the more frustrating is the fact that I encountered this same problem when I took pictures of the aurora back in July. On that occasion, I checked the first image after I captured it and saw the artifact, so the filter was removed for the rest of my images from that evening. Unfortunately, I did not remember this in September, and so here we are. Despite my disappointment with the artifact in my aurora images, I was not about to pass up an opportunity to learn something new. Examining my images closer, I noticed that the rings occurred very specifically where the light was monochromatic only. Notice in the image of Steve how the rings are only in the green parts and not in the pink or surrounding gray areas of the image. The next thing I noted was that the presence of the haze filter resulted in the configuration of a flat glass surface immediately next to a curved glass surface. As will be explained in a moment, this is a recipe for Newton's rings. The same situation exists when using a Barlow to image the sun in H-alpha, except that the flat surface is either the sensor window or the blocking filter, which is typically located upstream of the Barlow. It is also possible to get Newton's rings between the blocking filter and the camera window if they are not parallel to each other. So what exactly is going on to create this artifact? Well, as I mentioned, it starts with having the flat glass filter immediately next to the curved glass lens. Between them, there is a thin air gap, which is an important part of the scenario. At each boundary between air and glass, the incoming light will partly refract and partly reflect, like shown here in the schematic image. When the light is passing from air into glass, the reflection is phase shifted by 180 degrees. Let's zoom in on the reflections to get a better look. Since the air gap is changing in height across the aperture of the camera lens, the light reflected off the lens varies from being in phase and out of phase with the light reflected from the backside of the filter. In-phase reflections produce a bright ring, and out-of-phase reflections produce a dark ring. This light interference effect was first described by Robert Hooke in his 1665 book, Micrographia, but it was studied in greater detail by Isaac Newton in 1666, the results of which are detailed in his treatise on optics in 1704. Newton's thorough study of the effect is why it is named after him. I know I have described Newton's rings like they were the scourge of astronomers, but that is not an entirely fair description. The ring pattern is well behaved and predictable. Thanks to Newton's work, there is a well-understood relationship between the distance between rings and the radius of curvature of the lens. This fact can be used to measure curved surfaces with high precision. For example, when figuring telescope optics. So, I guess with that in mind, I can't be too angry at Newton for his rings. Nonetheless, I still have a mitt full of aurora images with an artifact in the middle. What can I do to get rid of this artifact? The first thing I tried was traditional flat frame techniques. By taking an image of a uniformly illuminated field using the same optics as on the night of the aurora images, I can, in theory, calibrate all my aurora images to make the rings go away. So I set up a light source with a glass diffuser in my basement and pointed my camera with haze filter at it. Well, the broad spectrum light pattern that was produced had no visible pattern at all, no rings. But wait, I needed monochromatic light. So next I tried adding a 3 nanometer bandpass oxygen 3 filter to my light source, since presumably the green emission in the aurora producing the rings was of oxygen. The result was again no Newton's rings. There was maybe the start of something visible, but not anything like a pattern in my aurora images. So the flat frame technique was a failure. After the failure of the flat frame idea, I reached out to someone I knew with a lot of astro image processing experience, Paul Cloninger. He was nice enough to research the problem and provided me a lead from a solar imaging group. The technique uses tools in the free software AstroImageJ to perform a fast Fourier transform on the image, a way of analyzing the image from the perspective of the frequency with which features occur in the image. By removing the features in the FFT plot that relate to the Newton's rings, an inverse FFT can be performed on the edited plot to regenerate the original image without rings, in theory. The technique seems to work in solar images with rings that are mostly straight lines. I tried the technique on my image, generating an FFT in AstroImageJ and editing that FFT in umpteen different ways. The result was, it did nothing. Another failure. Newton 2, Jim 0. The next idea I had was to create a mask of the ring pattern that I could use to selectively apply tone balancing to. I first tried to generate a mask from the aurora images themselves. I stacked all the images I had to try and create a master frame, but the result was too noisy and had too much non-uniformity to be useful as a mask. Next, I tried measuring the size of each ring pattern in order to generate a synthetic mask. I assumed that the function describing the variation of brightness in the rings was sinusoidal, with the frequency changing according to the relation I noted earlier. With the help of one of the engineers I work with, who is a MATLAB whiz, we generated an image with the theoretical ring pattern. When I tried to use the pattern as a mask, it only partly worked. The mask was not accurate enough, and due to the non-uniformity of the green monochrome emission in the images, it was impossible to make the rings disappear in all parts of the image at the same time. Alas, another failure. By this point, I had invested about a month of work trying to coax the rings to depart from my images. It was time to put the scalpel down and get the sledgehammer out of the shed. The brute force solution was to make a simple mask around the most heavily affected area and apply a strong Gaussian blur. After the blur filter, I added back some random noise so that the blurred area matched appearance better with the rest of the image. Here's an example of the result. It turned out, okay, I guess. Clumsy, but effective. The rings are no longer visible, but it's at the cost of a loss of detail in the aurora. In conclusion, my advice is to be aware of the situations where Newton's rings may occur. Shooting images of aurora with a filter on the end of your camera is one example. H-alpha solar imaging with a Barlow or tilted camera is another occasion where the rings may occur. Take the necessary actions required to prevent the rings from occurring before they happen, as they are very difficult to remove from your images after the fact. In my case, that means take the dang filter off. Well, that is the end of my tale. If there are any questions, I am happy to answer.
Okay, thank you, Jim. I don't see any questions just yet. Nope. Okay, so we will move on then. And we're moving into the observation reports. Andrea is up first, I believe. Yes.
And you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, good. So the very first image that I have is from the lunar eclipse last month. I know a lot of people took pictures of the eclipse, and thank you to everybody who sent them. And I put a lot on the Facebook page. And one of the things that I really wanted to do is to catch Uranus in the same frame, field of view as the lunar eclipse. So I did do a wide angle. I have also decided that I sent Mick all of my technical data about how I took photos so that I don't have to talk about it now, but all of it will be put on the website. Uranus was obviously very close to the moon, and in many parts of the world, there was an occultation. And that brings me up to this coming month. In the next Astro Notes, there's going to be an article about Mars. Mars opposition is December 8th, and there will be an occultation of Mars by the full moon on the night of December 7th. So you can read about that in the article in Astro Notes, and also there's quite a big section in the Observer's Handbook on it. So please make sure to look at that because Mars is coming up. I didn't have a chance to throw any Mars photos in. Okay, next, please. This was a sequence that I did with the same field of view. So the images that I took with the wide field of Uranus, I was then able to then take individual images and make a collage of the full moon eclipse. I took these images all from Britannia Beach. Doug Fleming, I know, was down there as well with his telescope. I was hoping to catch a bit of the moon setting into the horizon, but it got bright very, very quickly. But it was a beautiful eclipse. It wasn't as dark as the one in May. And I know there'll be some other eclipse photos coming along. So next, please. This is the Heart and Soul Nebula. And it's kind of relevant to talk about this, how I took this picture a little bit, because it is done with a mini refractor, just like Jim was talking about earlier. These two nebulas are found in Perseus, and they're very big. And it's very hard to get them both into one photograph, unless you have a very wide field scope. And I use the ASTAR 180 millimeter little mini telescope. And also of interest is that I did the star removal technique that Bob just spoke about. I did one whole night using an oxygen filter, a sulfur filter, and a hydrogen filter. The stars that you get with narrowband imaging are usually pretty terrible. And the only stars that I ended up keeping were the hydrogen alpha stars, which tend to be naturally much smaller. So it's kind of a natural, unnatural way of doing star reduction. If you wanted to be super scientifically accurate, you might do RGB stars and insert them, again, using a star exterminator by Russ Croman. In the end, so this is a narrowband combination. I also decided not to do the Hubble palette because it looked terrible and psychedelic. So I tried to go natural. Everywhere you see blue, that is where the nebulae are strong, emitting an oxygen. The red is hydrogen, and then where it's more orangey would be the sulfur. Next, please. And this is obviously a very popular target. It's the Pleiades, the Seven Sisters. It's a beautiful star cluster. And it's gone. But what is sort of fun about this image is I went again very wide with the ASTAR 180 so that you can see all the dust that surrounds this part of the sky. And the dust apparently is not related to the star cluster. That just happens to be traveling through interstellar dust. And again, I have all of the acquisition details, should be on the website. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. So I'm going to turn it over to Brian.
Well, good evening, everyone. And Andrea mentioning about the occultation of Mars on next Wednesday evening. Of course, the forecast is for the first night of -17, so that should be good. Anyway, the lunar eclipse, I really enjoyed that. I watched the entire event, but I watched it from an upstairs window. I had to remain indoors on that night, so we can see the moon there. There's a bit of light pollution there, but it just I like the arrangement of the photo. Next one, please. And just one more as it's getting more toward daylight, and so we can see that there's still the light down at the bottom. There's the moon nestled in the tree. I just like the way it was framed. You can see a little bit of a reflection just above the moon there from shooting through a window. Anyway, if you go to the next one, please. I was going into Stittsville at just before sunset, and I noticed a sun pillar. So I jumped out of the car and grabbed my phone. And then stepped toward a bit closer to the building just to drop the sun below the roof of the building. And I got this image of the sun pillar here. And the sun pillar forms when you have ice crystals falling down, usually from cloud formations, and the flat surface of the crystals as they're floating down reflect the light. So it was a very strong beam of light. If we go to the next one, please, Chris, thank you very much for doing that. I did my most excellent kind of filtering just to suss out the details, because it was a very strong kind of image and I wanted to blow it out just to see kind of what we're looking at, because it was reminding me of something. And if we go to the next one, please. All right, there's a clearer view of it here. And if we go to the next one, we'll see this is what it was reminding me of. A little bit of a Star Trek application here. Anyway, that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Brian. We've got Rob Dick coming up. And Chris, did you get an image ready for him? Rob's he's out in the boonies, so he's going to keep his video off. but you need to unmute yourself. There we go. Oh, there he is. Okay.
Oh, thanks very much. You'll remember Steve Nourse mentioning at the beginning that we shouldn't be overly wowed by all these wonderful pictures. That shouldn't deter you from going out and taking pictures. I like taking wide angle shots of the sky because that's the sky I remember when I was growing up doing meteor observing southwest of Ottawa. Well, I've been taking some pictures of the sky with a very wide angle camera, and when you look at these pictures, I'm taking them every 30-second exposure every 30 seconds. So as a result of that, you can accumulate maybe 400, 800, 1,000 pictures in a night. And when you go back and look at these, you do occasionally see some things that you didn't expect. And this is I think if we've got a bit of a video here, Chris, we can show what this is that I saw, and then you can tell me what you think it is. There it is. Right in the middle of the frame, just to the right of center. And we can zoom in on that, and you'll see that it is indeed rather bizarre. Normally what you'd end up seeing, I thought it might have been a cluster of meteors, perhaps it was a piece of space hardware, but it's in the case of a meteor, for that period of time, the meteor should essentially appear and disappear within about 30 seconds, easily within 30 seconds. They typically only last a few seconds. But here, it extended over several frames, indicating that it took longer than a minute to come and go. Can we play that video here, Chris? There we go. And you'll see that it's odd. There's threesome. And also you'll notice it moves with respect to the stars. So it's actually in the order of about a minute and a half to 3 minutes, 5 minutes. It actually moves with respect to the stars, not in right ascension, which would be east to west, would be horizontally, roughly horizontally, but rather in sort of the northwesterly direction. And I really haven't got a clue what it was that I imaged. And if anybody has any ideas, I'd be very interested to find out. Yeah, I don't think it's a spacecraft. I have recorded in the past images of spacecraft that are venting. They can literally hang in the sky for a long period of time, but this one is very perplexing. And that's all I can say for these.
Yeah, a number of folks have speculated that could be space debris re-entering the atmosphere.
Yeah, unfortunately, with the way it was moving, if you see those streaks were recorded in 30 seconds. Mm. So normally debris would occur in a matter of a split second to a second or so, and it would also cross a much larger area of sky. I've seen some satellites re-enter, and they can literally travel across 30, 60, even 90 degrees of the sky, depending upon where you are with respect to those. I pretty well ruled out space debris. It's certainly not a meteor, but it's sort of rude to say what it isn't without approaching this with a more open mind, because I really haven't got an idea it might be. If it was rocket exhaust in the atmosphere, again, it would have to be relatively close to us in terms of this was roughly about less than 45 degrees up in the horizon, from the horizon. So it'd have to be a rocket that was doing something literally over northern United States, southern Canada at that altitude. So it was, again, it's kind of crazy. And if you want to, we can start a bit of a dialogue on what it could be. And if you're interested in actually looking into it, I can send you the raw images that have these raw frames that have these images on it, and we can get together and try to take a look at it.
Which means, Rob, we're expecting another slide next month with the definitive answer.
Well, that depends how creative we are. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So, Richard.
Okay, so this is the first, the beginner challenge object for the month. This is NGC 7814, the Little Sombrero or Electric Arc Galaxy. This was quite a challenge for me to find. I didn't have a go-to mount, more about that later. And it's not near any particularly bright stars, so I was going to have a great deal of difficulty finding it from my Ottawa backyard. But then I was thinking about one of the presentations last month about different software that's available. And so I downloaded the ASTAP software, and one of its functions is that it can do plate solving. So it took a couple of tries to get this working. You have to put in the specifications of your optical train and camera and so on, and an estimate of where it is in the sky you're looking at. But once I'd done that properly, I did manage to do the plate solving, and then I could figure out where my telescope was pointing and find it in stellarium, and then shift it in the right direction and gradually narrow it down to the right location. So I found this a very interesting and effective way of star hopping that worked quite nicely. So as I say, this galaxy has a very dark dust lane across the middle, and some people call it the electric arc galaxy because it looks like two carbon filaments reaching towards the middle with a very bright spark between them. There's also a second galaxy just off to the right, a very tiny one, that's IC 5381. Next one. So after I had mastered this electronically assisted star hopping, I was ready for the intermediate challenge. And that was even more faint and obscure galaxy. This is NGC 520. And once I took a 30-second exposure of it, I could see it was something a little bit weird. Now, this is a stack here of 84 30-second exposures. And it's still very tiny in my optical system, but you can see that something weird is going on. This is actually a pair of galaxies that are colliding with each other, and the gravity is distorting both of the galaxies into some very weird shapes. Next one. Well, after I'd figured out how to do this star hopping, and I noticed that the Triangulum galaxy was straight north of NGC 520. So I moved up and spent the rest of the evening taking pictures of the Triangulum galaxy, M33. And because it was right overhead, it was less affected by the light pollution, but you can still see a fair degree down the right edge. But once again, I was trying the techniques that Bob was talking about of reducing the stars by using, I use a program called StarNet 2 that's available for PixInsight. So I remove the stars, bring up the galaxy's brightness, and then add the stars back in afterwards. It works quite well on this. But then once I was looking back in my own files, next picture, I found that I'd taken a picture of the Triangulum galaxy 1 year ago, the previous November. So I tried combining the two, and then I realized, oh, I need to take better notes of the pictures I'm taking and what configuration I use, because the two pictures were at 90 degrees to each other. And so each of them cropped the other one's extent of the spiral arms. So I'm going to have to try again, take some more pictures and try and get the full extent of this beautifully large galaxy. Next one. And then, of course, people have been talking about Mars coming up to its opposition. It's been beautifully placed in the late evening. So this is using an entirely different telescope setup, my old 8-inch Bausch & Lomb Schmidt-Cassegrain telescope. That's where I can get the really high magnification that's necessary to see anything on Mars. And I was kind of interested to see that a lot of people have been talking this year about not the Mars polar cap, but a polar hood. It's a kind of cloud formation that settles in over the North Pole of Mars at this particular time. So you can see that on the top of this image, and then the dark features in the southern hemisphere of Mars. It's very tricky getting good pictures of Mars. You have to wait for the moments of good seeing. The most successful techniques I found is to take about a 5-minute video and then process it with auto stackart to pull out just the best, maybe 1% of the images, because most of the images are quite blurred or distorted or bouncing around. So this lucky imaging technique of pulling out the best images from a video seems to be the best thing for amateurs to use. Okay, thank you. That's all for me.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Oscar, you are up next.
Hey, good evening, everyone. So I've got just a couple images to show here tonight. This first one here is Messier 2, which is a globular cluster in Aquarius. And it sits about 5 degrees north of Beta Aquarius. It's one of the largest known globulars, measuring 87, almost 87 and a half light years in radius. And it sits about 55,000 light years away. So I took this image October 22nd. In fact, this one and the next 2 images are all taken with 11-inch Edge HD through the ZWO ASI 2400 MC Pro. So this one's 145-second exposure, so about an hour and 15 minutes of integration. Next one, please. This one here is Messier 15, another globular, this time in Pegasus. It's also around the same size, actually, 88 light years in radius, but a lot closer, well, relatively a lot closer, 35,700 light years away. It's one of the most densely packed globular clusters that we know of, and it's undergone a process of contraction called core collapse. Not sure what that entails exactly, but maybe I'll do some reading up on it and cobble together a presentation or something someday. We'll see. Next one, please. This one here is NGC 7814, which is a spiral galaxy in Pegasus. It's seen edge-on from our perspective here on Earth. And it resembles Messier 1 of 4, the Sombrero galaxy, but it's much smaller. So it's given the nickname the Little Sombrero. So NGC 7814 is about 40 million light years away. It's about 60,000 light years across. So this was a 4-hour and 39-minute integration made of 93 180 seconds of exposures. Next one, please. All right, this is the Bubble Nebula, NGC 7635. It's a H2 region in the constellation Cassiopeia. The bubble is created by stellar wind from a massive hot central star, and as the solar wind pushes out the surrounding gas, it collides with the surrounding molecular cloud, which forms the shockwave fronts that form the actual bubble. So this nebula is about 7,100 light years away, and it's 3.7 light years in radius, approximately, at least the bubble portion. So this image I took October 2nd, slightly different image train. This was with a ZWO ASI 533 MC Pro through an 8-inch Edge HD. It's 100 3-minute exposures, so about a total integration of 5 hours. All right, and that's it from me this month.
Okay, thank you, Oscar. Go turn it over to Taras.
Good evening, everyone. So this is Jupiter picture, which I took on October 29th. The planet was at the opposition on September 26th, so it's more than months since opposition, but the planet was still quite big. It was 48 arc seconds in diameter, and this was the best choice, or sorry, the best chance for me to take it since the opposition. And I really enjoyed the view that night. Was really lots of details. So Jupiter was really looking beautiful. It still does. It's still quite high up in the late evening and early evening. And its last chances now to image it before it gets closer to the sunset. And we'll have to wait another almost a year for better view, while actually it will be higher next year, about 50 degrees up in the skies. Let's go to the next slide, please. And Mars, yes, is approaching the opposition, which would be just in a few days on December 8th. So Mars, these pictures were taken from September 11th until October 30th, with Mars slowly approaching us and increasing the size. You see that the image on the left of September 11, the diameter of planet was 10.5 arc seconds, while on the right, on October 30th, it was 15 arc seconds diameter. So when we get to December 8th, it's going to be at the opposition of 17 arc seconds diameter, while a night before, almost at the opposition, there's going to be a magnificent view of the planet hiding behind the lunar disk. So it's going to be occultation. It's quite a rare event. Would be a great thing to observe because of the planet's diameter. And that's going to be actually specifically very well seen from our latitude, because when you go south, it's going to be less and less kind of like almost just touching the surface of the moon, and more to the south, it will not even hide behind it. So use the chance, and let's hope for good weather and clear skies for us to be able to observe it. Let's go to the next slide. Uranus, so all those pictures of these planets were taken on in the night from October 29th to October 30th, and this was the last chance to image something that night for me, which was actually Uranus pretty much right above the head. So diameter of this planet was only 3.8 arc seconds, and I had to adjust the curves, or rather histogram for this image to show up the details. And particularly, actually, there is no details on the planet, of course, but there is moons of Uranus showing up. Let's go to the next slide. Here I tried to mark them down, with Miranda being the dimmest and the closest to the planet. And to be specific, it's only 500 kilometer diameter moon of Uranus. At that night, it was at the distance of 18.7 astronomical units. So it's quite amazing that from such a distance, we are able to see relatively small moon, only 500 kilometer diameter, but it did show up in the picture. Let's go to the next slide. And yes, the lunar eclipse. So this was November 8th, well known by, I guess, and well seen by practically every one of us, I guess. This was taken from the patio, or rather from behind the Chateau Laurier. There is observation pad, and the view of Parliament Hill was somehow not really nicely decorated by the crane, but I guess it adds maybe to the moon. So, sorry, to the mood rather. Let's go to the next slide. And yeah, this was actually the lunar eclipse at almost a totality around 5:30, 5:45 a.m. When it was already close to the dawn, and the eclipsed moon was about to set. So I took this picture when, as you see, the background of the sky was already getting quite bright. And let's go to the next one. And this is the stacked version of the moon at almost totality, because again, it would have to be in a quite low elevation to see the full totality, and with the brighter sky. So we still see a little bit of brighter limb on the right side. And let's go to the next slide. I managed to take the time lapse within almost a 2-hour duration from 4:20 until almost 6 o'clock when the shadow was approaching. And let's run it. Yeah, you can see how the black background becomes quite brighter, and stars are moving at the background. So that was about 90 frames stacked with a duration about 2 minutes, if I'm not mistaken, between each shot. So it's the period of time, or rather, was it minute and a half or something like that. So this was the end of the lunar eclipse when the sky became much brighter, and unfortunately, later on, it was already too bright to see it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Taras. I'm going to turn it over to Paul. And Paul doesn't have any video, so we're going to look at Taras until Paul has finished his presentation. There we go. Oh, okay, Taras has turned off his.
Well, good evening, everyone. Well, for those who managed to venture outside to catch the lunar eclipse on November the 8th, I trust you didn't find the cold winds too nasty. I observed the event with Oscar Echeverry and James McQuaig at the Diefenbunker site in Carp, where we had an unobstructed view to the west where the moon would be setting as it was coming out of the eclipse. As you can see from my equipment setup diagram at the lower left, I used my ice shelter / portable control room to set up the computers controlling the 2 cameras I was using, and also to give us a heated space to get out of the chill and periodically gusting winds. Our decision to view the event from the Diefenbunker was a bit touch and go, since a large cloud mass was descending southward from the north, but it turned out to be a good call as the cloud's mass's leading edge dissolved as it reached the Ottawa Valley. So here are a few images from various stages of the eclipse, and on the right you can see the eclipse moon as it neared the end of totality. At that point, the moon was only about 4 degrees above the horizon, and dawn's growing light made it increasingly difficult to observe. These views were all taken with a 200mm lens on a Canon RP mirrorless full-frame camera, and that was mounted on a Star Adventurer mount to track the moon's motion. You can really get a sense of how dramatically the ambient sky brightness varied as the event progressed in the time-lapse sequence on the next slide. If you could advance that, please, Chris. So like Taras, I put together a bit of a time-lapse here. This was taken with the my 82mm Evolux Apo with a Canon 70D camera attached, and it was riding on a Celestron CG4 mount. You can see the Earth's shadow progressing over the moon, and then I began changing the exposure lengths to capture the refracted red light as the moon passed deeper into the shadow. The exposure lengths were certainly more challenging than usual for a total lunar eclipse because of the timing in our part of the world. The penumbral and partial phases occurred in full night, but the total phase actually began 4 minutes after the beginning of astronomical dawn. And at the time of maximum eclipse at 5:59, we were already 47 minutes into that dawn light, and the sky was getting noticeably brighter. The total phase ended at 6:41, but by 6:30 a.m., it was already almost impossible to see or image the moon from our location on the planet. Some thin clouds that were moving in also didn't help much in that regard either. It was certainly an interesting eclipse, though, and the variable lighting made for some nice views both to the naked eye and to the camera. This time lapse, by the way, runs for about 20 seconds, and it covers a real time period of about 100 minutes. Okay, next one, please. So just a couple of still shots here that I took as the event was winding into the morning light. This was a single 0.6 of a second exposure at ISO 400 through the 82mm Apo. It was taken about half an hour before sunrise and about 19 minutes before the end of totality. The reddish pre-sunrise light on the low clouds was quite noticeable. And you'll see that in the next slide as well. If you would, Chris, there we go. This was captured with a 200 millimeter lens just a couple of minutes before the previous slide. It's a quarter of a second exposure at ISO 400. And within 10 minutes after this was taken, the moon had sunken to a lower elevation and the sky was really brightening, as you saw in the time lapse, effectively ending our view of the event. Now we'll have to wait until March 13th, 2025 for the next view of the total lunar eclipse in our neck of the woods. All right, next one, please. So this view of the moon had nothing to do with the eclipse, but instead was taken 9 days later on November the 17th. This was just one day after the launch of the Artemis 1 spacecraft towards the moon. And I had just actually stepped outside thinking of that launch and wanting to see the moon while the spacecraft was en route. What I wasn't expecting was to see anything quite so dramatic, though. The multi-ringed iridescent halo created by the moonlight streaming through the clouds was really stunning. It was very bright and very large. I dashed inside to grab a camera because I could see that it wouldn't last long with much thicker clouds approaching quickly from the west. I've actually kept the processing to a minimum here because I wanted to keep the image as close as possible to what I was observing visually. You could see the different colors in the halo, the reds and the oranges and the blues towards the center. It was just I've seen a lot of lunar halos in my observing years, but I must say this was just the right combination of clouds and their density and the phase of the moon, and it was just one of the best halos that I've seen. And on reflection, really, the view seemed very appropriate. With Artemis heading out there, the moon and halo looked like a giant bullseye, or perhaps even a portal, as to what's coming up. All right, my final image, please. Well, totally removed here from the moon and eclipses. This image was taken last Saturday, excuse me, after learning that comet 29P Schwarzmann-Bachmann 1 was undergoing an outburst and had brightened by over 4 magnitudes in just a few days prior. Outbursts are actually a fairly regularly known occurrence for this comet and are believed to be cryovolcanic eruptions blasting material off the body and forming a debris cloud around it. The eruption that's just occurred, however, is the second biggest one seen in more than 10 years. And in fact, 2 further eruptions have occurred in just the last couple of days, adding to the material already expelled. This is certainly an interesting comet on a number of fronts. It actually orbits out beyond Jupiter with a period of about 14.7 years and has a quite large coma diameter of approximately 60 kilometers. That's on the big side for comets. Because of its distance where it hangs out past Jupiter, it's usually around 16th magnitude, so not very bright at all. But when it erupts like this, that brightness can actually jump to as high as magnitude 10. You can see in the image that there's definitely a structure to this outburst, forming a horseshoe-shaped fan around the bright inner coma. And there are hints at brighter, more concentrated streaks radiating out from the central coma itself. What I find cool is that, like Taras was saying about the moons of Uranus, is that with this comet, that we can actually see such a normally faint body out beyond Jupiter at all. I mean, 60 kilometers out that far, that's a pretty tiny little object, but when it undergoes outbursts like this, it makes itself known. My stack here is an image of 10 90-second exposures with the 11-inch Edge HD and the ASI 294 MC Pro camera. And in truth, the comet was easily visible in even shorter exposures. I'm actually really hoping to be able to image this body again as soon as we get some clear skies and before it starts to fade, to see just how large this debris cloud has become, especially with the eruptions, the subsequent eruptions that have just occurred in the last couple of days. I mean, at the distance this comet was from the Earth on this night, I measured the debris cloud at 37 arc seconds across as seen from the Earth, or a little over twice the current apparent diameter of Mars as seen from Earth. That actually corresponds to a diameter of about 140,000 kilometers for the cloud. So this is a large structure with a diameter about half the moon's radius from the Earth. So it'll be interesting to see if it's grown at all. And hopefully we don't have to wait until like, I don't know, January or February for clear skies. Anyway, fingers crossed. Wishing you everybody clear skies and a very Merry Christmas, since we won't get a chance to chat again until after the new year. Take care.
Hello, am I to start now?
Go ahead.
Okay, I presented this image of the Crab Nebula at last month's meeting. I was contacted by Tony Peterson, at which point he told me that he had also imaged the Crab Nebula 10 years ago in 03. He wondered if I could image it in 03 and we could then compare our images and might be able to calculate the speed at which this nebula is expanding away from the center of its supernova explosion. Next slide. This is Tony's 10-year-old 03 image. Next slide. This is my new image, also taken in 03. Next image, please. The images are quite similar, except Tony used a 10-hour exposure. Next. And I was only able to squeeze in 2 hours. There's an obvious difference in how deep the pictures are. Next image. Before I could do any calculations, I really needed to know where the center pulsar star was. This is the spot where the original supernova occurred. I then chose a wavefront on the outer edge of the nebula that was in both of our photos. I figured that a feature on the edge would be more likely like traveling perpendicular to our line of sight with the nebula. Next image, please. This is a close-up. To calculate the distance, we compared the wavefront in our images. Okay, Chris, could you just move this back and forth to this one and the next one? This is mine, and that's Tony's. Mine is after Tony's. To calculate the distance, we compared this wave front in our images. Tony's was taken 10 years before mine. The images, especially mine, are blurry enough to make exact measurements tough. But on expanding the images, so the individual pixels showed up, it appeared to me that the expansion was something between 1.5 and 2 pixels. If you look at that front at the edge, you'll see that mine is a little ahead to the left. Next, reverse the, do it again, please. Okay, yeah, just flip it back and forth a touch. Yeah, mine is just a little ahead of Tony's, a couple of pixels. Okay, next slide. Once you have figured out the expansion between the two images in pixels, how do you convert that to a speed? There are all kinds of ways of doing this, but I will show you mine. I will start with a reminder of the definition of the trig function tangent. The tangent of a triangle is equal to the opposite side divided over the adjacent side. In our triangle, that is the distance of the wavefront moved divided by the distance of the Crab Nebula. In my camera, I did a plate solve, and my camera, each pixel is 0.5 arc seconds, 0.95 arc seconds, and that is decimal 0.0002639 degrees. Okay, next, please. So if the nebula moves 1 pixel in my camera, it has traveled a distance of 2.83 times 10 to the 11th kilometers. That's just for 1 pixel. Okay, next picture, please. But the nebula has moved somewhere between 1.5 and 2 pixels. This works out to a speed of between 1346 kilometers at 1.5 pixels and a speed of 1794 kilometers per second at 2 pixels. Okay, next slide, please. So you can see there that we have now the speed at 1.5 pixels and also for 2 pixels if it moved that far. Okay, the accepted value of the speed is actually 1,500 kilometers per second. So we've bracketed it here. So we're right between the known value is right between our two values. This calculation was a lot of fun. I really appreciate Tony sending me both the suggestion and the data that I needed. He also aligned the images, which is the tough part of the analysis. Next slide. This is the pulsar again. I really can't leave this image without mentioning a bit more about this pulsar at the center of the nebula. It is a remnant of a star that exploded in a supernova in the year 1054. It is about 20 kilometers in diameter and has a mass 1.5 times that of our sun. A teaspoon of this neutron star material would weigh about 1 billion tons. Okay. It spins 30 times a second, and its spin is creating an outflow of wind that generates a synchron emission. This comes in all wavelengths from radio waves to gamma rays. It is very bright in X-rays. In the 1950s and 60s, the sun's corona was mapped when the sun passed in front of this pulsar. In 2003, the thickness of the atmosphere of the Saturn's moon Titan was also measured as it blocked X-rays as it passed in front of this pulsar. Thank you, and as Paul said, Merry Christmas to you.
Dave, we're not hearing you, though you're not muted.
How's that?
That's better.
Sorry. Okay. I have a switch further down my wire here that I must have pushed. Okay. Sorry about that. So here are our last month observing challenges. Let's see what the upcoming ones are. So our deep sky challenge for beginners, Messier 2. It's a globular cluster in Aquarius, 6.5 magnitude in brightness, 16 degrees apparent size. Sorry, 16 minutes apparent size. Deep Sky Challenge NGC 1333, a reflection nebula in the constellation Perseus. All these will be in Astronotes, so don't worry, don't need to write them down. You'll get them shortly. Next one, the Advanced Challenge is SH2-224, a supernova remnant in Aruga. So that's our Deep Sky Challenge. Lunar Challenge is Crater Vandellinus. I'm not sure I pronounced that correctly. It's a lunar impact crater near the southeast limb of the moon, 147 kilometers in diameter, 2.6 kilometers deep. So there's a summary of these, and again, these will all be in our Astronotes. The Fred Lawson Observatory is open for us to use. We just ask, and then we have a members-only star party on December the 17th. Will be the next one, and hopefully we'll have clear skies for that. Here's the folks who keep our club going. We got our flow director, Rick Souls, Stan Mott Book Library, Estelle Rother, and the Ted Bean Loan Library. Darren has stepped down after many years doing that, so we are looking for somebody to take that over. And from RASC membership info, Art Fraser, and the membership cards also come from Art Fraser. So thank you. We have 75 folks out at the meeting tonight. Special thanks go out to the RAC National Office and Zoom. Comments and ideas. Mick is always looking for presentations, and please email meetingshare@ottawa.rasc.ca. Okay, so video of tonight's meetings and our stonker, that must be Mick's comment there. Monthly newsletter, it definitely is. Available on our fabulously well-provisioned website, ottawa.rasc.ca. So our next meeting will be Friday, January the 6th, and it will again be via Zoom. Hopefully at some point in the new year, we'll be back in the Aviation and Space Museum. So thank you folks for coming out tonight. Have a Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year, and clear skies.